Hey class, so today we'll be working on the 6.4a lesson, and it is on diameters and circles. So let's go ahead and get ready to take some notes. I'll be going through the entire lesson today, and if you want to follow along by writing notes on your own piece of paper, that's totally fine. You can also find the student edition copy and just uh, follow along digitally, or you can print the lesson yourself. Okay, let's get started. So the first part of the lesson says to label the center of a circle. Hopefully you're familiar with circles and you've learned about circles in the past. We know that a circle by definition is the shape where there's a center and there's something that we call a radius, right? Typically you see that a radius is drawn like this, and a circle basically is just a set of unlimited points that have the same distance from a center. This same distance is called the radius, and a circle technically has like an infinite amount of radiuses, or radii for that matter. But when you double the radius, there's a special name for that, and we call that the diameter, right? A diameter is a chord that passes through the center and touches both edges of a circle, right? Two edges of a circle. Draw and label the diameter DG. Okay, so you could just draw it anywhere. I'm just going to label it, draw it right here. We know that this is going to be a diameter because it passes through the center. Okay, so here are some definitions, some vocabulary words that you need to know. A circle is the set of all points in a plane that are a given distance from the center. It is named by the center. So in our example before, we had a circle that had a center that was C. So we call this circle C. A radius is the distance from the center of a circle to any point on the circle. So a radius is just something like that. Typically we call it R. A diameter is a line segment with endpoints on the circle that passes through the center of the circle. Okay, so I'm going to just draw another diameter like that. It has to pass through the center. And if you realize that it passes through the center, you can also realize that D is always equal to 2R. All right, the diameter of a circle is always twice the length of the radius. Okay, and then now we're going to talk about circumference. So the circumference is the distance around a circle. Sometimes we also call it, you could think of it as the perimeter of the circle. And typically when we deal with other shapes, it's easy to find the perimeter because we just add up all the sides. But in this case, a circle does not have sides. And in this case, we know that the formula to calculate the circumference is simply 2 pi r. Okay, sometimes we don't even write 2 pi r, and we just call it pi times diameter. We'll just keep that in your notes for now, okay? And then the area is the space outside of a circle. So if the circumference is the outer edge, we know that the area of a circle is kind of like the space in between, right? The area of a shape is always the space in between the closed boundaries of the circle or shape, and the area is going to relate with pi, and I'm just going to go ahead and give you the formula right now. You'll learn it later. We're going to do this a lot in 8th grade, but it's pi r squared. So it's, in other words, it's pi times the radius times the radius. So what exactly is pi? Well, the next page has a definition that we should all look at, and it's in the middle, and it's pi. We just had Pi Day. We kind of know that pi is approximately 3.14. You may know other values after that, but for this class, we always want to use 3.14 as the approximation, right? It's approximately 3.14. So whenever we're doing a calculation, when we use our calculator, you'll see me today use 3.14 on my calculator. The symbol itself is pi. Okay, that's all we're going to do on this page. Let's go ahead and skip to the next page. So now it has, I already gave you these definitions. I sometimes tend to do that on accident, but let's go ahead and define what the circumference of a circle is, right? C is equal to 2 pi r, where you just take your 2, you take the pi value, which is approximately 3.14, and then you just multiply it by the circle's radius, and you will get the circle's circumference. But since we also know that 2r is also known as the diameter, we then can also create another formula that's exactly identical by just saying that circumference is equal to pi times diameter. In different situations, they may give you a diameter, they may give you a radius, and you just have to pick and choose between which formula you plug it into. Okay, so let's go ahead and practice. So for this circle, they gave us the diameter. So immediately I'm going to write C equals pi times D because they're asking me to find the circumference. And notice how this instruction says to leave your answer in pi form. If they ask us to leave the answer in pi form, this is what we call the exact form, where you don't have to plug in anything to the calculator. You just have to take your diameter and multiply it by pi. Right. So in this case, C is equal to 2.5 times pi. And believe it or not, that's it. Now, one thing that I forgot to do that I realized immediately is you always have to label, right? So just like we're talking about feet, we're talking about meters. In this case, we're talking about centimeters. So you always want to label what unit we're using. Okay, so in pi form is considered the exact form, but typically in real life we actually don't use pi because although it's more accurate, we actually want to know what the value is. So when they say to use 3.14, this is the approximation section. So pi is approximately 3.14. And then you're going to have to say, okay, so then I just have to take my calculator and go 2.5 times 3.14. So 2.5 times 3.14 is going to equal 7.85. And again, let's not forget to label. Okay, these two values are actually very close. It's just the exact form is in pi form, and the approximation is using 3.14 as your pi value. Okay, again, we were given the diameter, so we use this formula. In the next example, we're not given the diameter, we are given the radius, so we're not going to use this formula. We're going to use C equals 2 pi r. Again, in this column, they want us to use the exact form. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the answer as pi and say C is equal to 2 pi times 3 because 3 is the radius. Okay. Then obviously, you know that you can multiply the 2 and the 3 and you get 6 pi. And the units were units, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Okay. For the approximation, all you have to do is take this now and just instead of using 3.1, instead of using pi, you should use 3.14 and just plug it into the calculator. 6 times 3.14 is going to give me 18.84 units, and that's it. Pretty simple. All you have to do is plug it into the formula. Okay, so the next question gives us a situation, and they say, if the circumference of a circle is 8 pi, approximately 25.1 inches, which of the following is true? Okay, so a couple things I want to write down. I definitely want to write down the formula using the diameter, and I also want to write the formula using the radius. Notice how they tell us that the circumference is 8 pi. So if the circumference is 8 pi, doesn't that mean that the diameter has to be 8? Because according to the formula, pi times d is equal to the circumference. So if pi times d equals 8 pi, that means the diameter must be 8. And also, if the diameter is 8, remember, class, that the diameter is double the radius, right? So using that knowledge, we also already know that the radius must be half. It must be 4. So before we even start looking at all these options, true or false, you definitely want to write down what you know, right? So whenever I see a situation like this, I write down what I know, I write down the facts, and then I look at the true and false, and I can kind of see what's true and what's false. So let's go ahead and read this. The ratio of circumference to diameter is 8. Okay, so we also know that a ratio, for example, is basically a division, or it's a quotient, right? So they're basically saying C over D equals 8. Well, that does sound decently good, except we know that C divided by pi should be 8, right? Because C is equal to pi times D. So if you divide both sides by pi, you would get the diameter, okay? So this is actually false, although it sounds pretty good. This is false because it's supposed to be the ratio of circumference to pi. That would be 8. That would equal the diameter. The radius of the circle is 1/2 the circumference. What do we think of that, class? Well, actually, the radius is not half of the circumference. This is also false. The radius is actually half of the diameter. Okay? The diameter of the circle is twice the radius. True. The diameter of a circle is twice the radius. The radius of the circle is 8. Well, according to our information, no, that's false. We said that the radius was 4 inches. The diameter of the circle is 8. We know that's true. So just for future reference, you definitely want to look at the given information, and whatever they give you, write down the two formulas for circumference, and then calculate the diameter and radius on the side before you answer the true and false. Okay, let's take a break.